Welcome to the Oyster Stew podcast. I'm Bob Mooney, General Counsel of Oyster Consulting. After nearly a decade of delays, FINRA is enacting amendments to Rule 4210. The new covered agency transaction requirements became effective May 22nd of this year. In today's podcast, recorded on May 10th, Oyster's Jeff Gearhart and Jose Fernandez talk with Stephen Mellert, co-founder of Capital Markets Engineering and Trading and developer of the Matrix application margin calculator. Jeff, Jose, and Stephen share their operations expertise and insights into what the new rule means for market makers, the capital implications, and the importance of automation. Let's get started. Jeff?
Thanks, Bob. Joining me today is Stephen Mellert from Matrix Applications. Matrix has developed a margin calculator tool or software product that is used by various firms in the industry to track the margin value, collateral requirements, etc. And of course, he's well versed on 4210 and the related processes. Also, Jose Fernandez from Oyster Consulting, in his prior roles as head of operations overseeing the operations impact of 4210, margin, collection, pricing, etc. He brings a lot of knowledge as well. So, Stephen, as our honored guest speaker, you get to go first, as you would expect. Just with the rule coming into effect on May 22nd, I mean, at this point, do you see any big obstacles or surprises for firms at this point?
Well, first off, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be honored, the honored guest. And as far as surprises go, no, I don't think there should be any surprises. I mean, this rule has been discussed, modified, criticized, and advertised as coming soon since 2012. So it's basically a classic case of boy who cried wolf, but it's here now. So I don't see how firms could be surprised that it finally went into effect. Also, FINRA gave a healthy 9 to 10 months to actually implement the final changes and the final amendments. As far as the obstacles go, I mean, if your firm doesn't have a solution by now, you're probably not going to be able to implement something in-house in time. There's a lot of coordination between the trading desk, the operations groups, your FinOp, your regulatory reporting groups, credit officers, risk departments. There's a lot of coordination that needs to take place. So obstacle-wise, there are plenty of obstacles internally if you don't have something yet. I mean, I think for small firms, many of them lack the technology resources and they're still using spreadsheets and things, but as we'll sort of find out later on in the podcast, it gets complicated fast. I'd say a lot of the large firms, not surprised, and by now they all have solutions in place.
I think that sounds right to me. I mean, if you're surprised, then holy cow, where have you been?
If you're surprised, you shouldn't be trading TBAs.
Jose, from your experience, I mean, you've handled the collateral movements, the pricing, everything related to those functions. What do you think on the topic?
Yeah, I think as Stephen just mentioned, there are certain things that should be in place by now, and if you haven't done it, then shame on you. But in the end, really what we're talking about here is careful and considerate coordination between the departments, right? As you think about, front office, middle office, back office, your risk teams, even your legal team, as you think of NSFDAs and the likes. And I think that's probably the one thing to really take away from this is that this is a coordinated effort that is applicable and touches various areas within an organization. And for that reason, that coordination is a constant one, right? Not just ahead of the rule becoming effective, right? Which we're talking about, 12 days or something right now from now, but also going forward, right? That's going to be the key.
Okay. I think automation is going to be essential. If you're a firm of any size and any degree of activity, Stephen, and developing the margin calculator tool or software, can you share any perspective on what firms may or may not do correctly? And then even elaborate a little bit about what the tool can do and how it can make the whole process easier to manage.
Sure. I mean, we were very methodical in our approach. We went line by line and through the rule, interpreting it from is your counterparty a FINRA member or a mortgage bank or a federal banking agency? Gross exemption qualifiers and small cash counterparties. We went through everything and basically created almost a waterfall and built the logic. And so when you're trading and putting your trade into the system, it does look through, checks all the different categories and attributes of your counterparty, the security, and timing, and will then generate your exposure and your margin call, and whether you've satisfied the margin call or using collateral and things. So I would suggest for firms that are looking at sort of creating some sort of automation is that they need to map out their counterparties and what their MSFTA parameters are, and also map out all the details from the rule. And then sort of need to figure out where you're getting the data from. I mean, you're going to have your primary trading system. Are you building this thing inside or outside of that primary trading application? And how aware are you storing the MSFTA data? So there's all sorts of reporting and auditing capabilities we built into Margin Calculator. At the end of the day, you need to figure out what would FINRA want to see when they come in to audit you to make sure you're complying with the rule.
Is there a lot of integration in terms of from the trading system, credit systems, pricing systems? Like how involved is it?
Sure. I mean, Margin Calculator takes in a series of files from your books and records trading system. I mean, a firm basically has to make sure they have all the account information and the margin requirements of that counterparty, but also you need to take in prices from some sort of pricing source, and that might be a source of, usually it's Bloomberg or ICE, although you can provide your own internal prices, so that may lead to more disputes down the line. And then you also have to coordinate taking in the margin calls and what time those things came in to satisfy a margin call or not satisfy it. You need to track the aging of the margin calls. So there are lots of different inputs into the system. And as mentioned, sort of from our perspective, we can take in accounts, the trades, the securities, prices, margin movements, and any fails. And we basically put those all into Margin Calculator, and then we'll calculate your exposure.
That actually sheds a little light on the complexity too. That's a lot of inputs if you're trying to do this on a spreadsheet.
Yes.
Absolutely. Jose, you managed this, from your perspective, what went wrong? What were the biggest concerns in the daily management of the collateral process?
I think, as Stephen has alluded, quite honestly, it is the tracking of the collateral, right? Performing the calculations, understanding and being able to have at your fingertips, the language that's contained in each individual MSFTA, right? To be able to manage that exposure accordingly. And so, as we've stated and we'll continue to state, is trying to do this on a manual basis, it is rather challenging, right? Depending on the activity level that a firm may have. But the key here is automation, right? I mean, at the end of the day, if you can automate this, if you can leverage an application such as Margin Calculator, it's doing all that work for you, right? The output's only as good as the input. Happy to hear that the whole Matrix team has taken the rule and really dissected it and built a tool around it that should make it easier for firms. But the biggest challenge, again, is really the calculations, the collateral movement, documenting that, having it consistently applied, and then being able to adapt or address any concerns that come out of that.
One follow-on point, Jose, you do bring up a good point in that, when FINRA comes in to sort of check your books and records and make sure you have the policies and procedures, a homegrown system or using spreadsheets, you're going to fail an audit. You're not going to have the level of detail that FINRA would want to see when they're conducting an audit to make sure you've done A, B, and C by set times 1, 2, and 3.
I was going to say that's a really good point. Firms may be avoiding the cost of a tool. However, you still have to do this. Even if you're going to take the capital hit, you have to calculate the capital hit. You have to have this information. So you're not going to avoid some type of process. One question kind of following up on what you said earlier about pricing sources and avoiding disputes. Any thoughts on what is the best source using, you mentioned Bloomberg and ICE, 2 standards that probably would avoid a lot. But I recall from my days managing a desk that there could be disputes over collateral value and the exposure of the mark to market.
Well, I mean, ICE is basically the bellwether, and Bloomberg, though, is gaining ground. ICE keeps acquiring other entities. For instance, Black Knight acquired EMBS, and that was for mortgage descriptive data and factors. and ICE acquired them. But Bloomberg is gaining ground and being a pricing source. But I mean, for the most part, the margin is back and forth every day. You're in favor one day, it kind of swings back in your favor the next day. For small firms, it's less of an impact because there's small movements from day to day. You're not going to have large margin calls. But for larger firms, you are going to have large margin calls going back and forth. And generally, the attitude's been, well, it'll come back to my favor the next day, which is fine. But during times of market stress, like in 2008 or the outbreak of COVID, you better be sure of your calculations and your methods and your pricing source, because you really do want to minimize disputes.
Right. I was reading the FINRA releases on the topic, and it mentioned that it's expecting members to act in good faith in terms of pricing and resolving disputes. But they even suggested that you could use a replacement charge approach to, what it would cost you if you had to cancel a transaction and enter a new one. Can neither of you imagine anybody trying to do that versus using a valid pricing source? Well, that would be hard to defend, wouldn't it?
Yes, I think it would be very difficult to defend. In Margin Calculator, we do allow you to override a particular price with a particular counterparty, because perhaps you're trading some small TBA, or sorry, some small pool that is thinly traded, and one market participant is the one that actually creates the price. You can override that price every day, and the system will actually log the fact that you overrode the price. But in general, I think it would be difficult to sort of enter a new transaction in at the same price. In Margin Calculator, we do allow you basically to cancel and rebook a new trade online, or you can upload it via the file. And Margin Calculator will recalculate the exposure, and it'll tell you if that rebooking involves returning some margin or requiring more margin from your counterparty.
Can we talk a little bit more about just what the tool can do? I mean, obviously, it's valuing collateral, money movements. Does it help, with the setup and management of MSFTAs, or what are the features?
Sure. I mean, the system's very automated. I mentioned earlier, everything's sort of templatized. So there's 90 uploads of the data, whether it's accounts, the trades, securities, prices failed, and margin movements. Those are all just simple text file formats. And in fact, we've actually mapped our requirements for our files against the largest corresponding clearing agents' standard files. So it can pull the margin calculated data in automatically every night. So we've simplified it for that corresponding clearer, and we can do so for others. But the automation part is key. When the margin clerk or margin manager comes in the morning, they'll see their exposures. Basically, they can sort by the largest counterparty exposure, and then just click on an icon, which will automatically send out an email, which contains all the details, all of my trades with you, any margin movements that might have mitigated my exposure, and then the residual exposure that I'm making the margin call for. And it sends that out an email along with the prices and all the details. So it does minimize the amount of disputes that you would have. Now, the system also presumes that it's not a books and records system. We already have that. Most clients already have that. But it does automatically book the margin movements so that you can see whether you satisfied the margin and it's compliant, or it's waiting for margin to come in, or some sort of exception status. I mean, as far as the MSFTAs go, we don't really support we're not uploading MSFTAs into the system. We have all the fields in the counterparty details for an MSFTA, but we don't really store the uploading and interpreting or storing of the actual PDFs and things. That's actually left up to the broker-dealer to maintain their own records.
Right. That's typically part of a credit process, I imagine.
Yes, you're correct.
Jose, when you were managing your operations group, I mean, it's clear it was pretty complex. Did you use a tool like this? Was it an in-house tool, or what was your approach to managing the whole process?
Yeah, I think at that particular moment in time, there wasn't the technology out there. The rule was just being adopted. And obviously, there was a lot of pushback from the industry. So there wasn't a lot of vendors that were coming to the table with a solution. So at that particular moment in time, a lot of it was done manual. And again, I can't speak enough about the coordinated effort between the different departments, that allowed us to really monitor and track this exposure in line with the rule and the expectations. But yeah, so it was, as we talked, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of communication. And, one thing to keep in mind is that it is not one size fits all type of solution, right? So you may have, different clients that have different requirements. So you think about pricing sources, you think about collateral types. as you think about just how they're set up internal in their internal systems. So yeah, it got complicated real quick, but I think it's something that again, can it be done manually? Well, if you've got a great team and great coordination and great communication and have some internal tools that you can ensure that everybody's looking at the same information at the same time, then maybe you can get away with it. But right now, with the volume that most clients are transacting in, it'll be hard to do without some technology.
And that's also presuming that no one goes on vacation.
Oh, that's the other thing. Yeah. Key man-woman risk, absolutely. Was always an issue.
Jose, you and I have talked previously about the capital hits and the ability of a firm to take the capital charge versus collecting margin. But given all the factors we've discussed here, you still have to have this process, right? That's kind of what I mentioned earlier about needing to know what the capital charge is. You see any way around that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's first and foremost, I mean, you've got to have that risk determination limit, right, established for every counterparty, which, should be part of your risk program. And so, being able to monitor and track that is going to be key for you to ensure that, again, whether a firm, makes the decision to take a capital hit in lieu of collecting margin, and whether they apply it across all their clients or some clients, right? We continue to talk about the nuances with this rule and trying to comply with it. The capital implications of it are one that need to be closely monitored, especially when you think about things such as they were expected to send in collateral and you didn't receive that collateral, right, on D+1 as they refer to it, right? And then how are you supposed to report that, right, at the end of the day? If let's say they had a 300,000 negative mark to mark, right? So now you're supposed to be reporting 50, but they only send 25, right? So what are you supposed to report? So if you look at the FAQs that are out there that FINRA has published, and they go through a bunch of these scenarios and they give you kind of what their expectation is. And I think it's important for firms to take a look at that and understand what the implication to their net reporting based off that expectation from FINRA is. And help that guide you. But it gets real complicated, especially if you're sending partials and if you have a discrepancy in the pricing, as we talked about earlier, right? All of these factors play into how one is expected to apply that to their net capital deductions.
And actually, one thing we had mentioned before about surprises, this is probably the only thing that might surprise firms, in that this capital in lieu of margin feature is relatively new. It's only come out in the last round of amendments, and FINRA only recently gave one or two sessions online to kind of walk people through what it looks like. They had a spreadsheet which they had not shared yet, but they showed on screen, but people haven't really had a chance to really dive into it. We recently added the capital charge capability to Margin Calculator. So instead of using your cash and securities, there's a capital as a so-called asset you can apply. The system will produce a cumulative capital that you've used. We don't know what the firm's tentative net capital or capital details are, but we can provide the inputs for the dealer to perform their own internal calculations. And then along with the capital charge, basically an unaddressed exposure. So as Jose, you pointed out, the 300 exposure, 250 limit, 50 with capital. If someone didn't apply the whole thing, we do track that unaddressed exposure to make sure that you can figure out what you need to do to become compliant.
Again, looking at my prior experience with some of your counterparties, it is likely you could get partial deliveries on collateral or late deliveries on collateral. That would become pretty important regardless.
Yes, and then as I said before, like sending it in today or sending it in tomorrow, like when do you send the collateral in does impact all these calculations. The spreadsheet route would be nearly impossible to keep track of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a quick question here for both of you, and I think this is right, but this rule applies to you regardless of how you clear. If you're self-clearing, obviously you control everything, but even if you're clearing through another broker-dealer, the rule still applies to you. You don't pass this responsibility off to your clearing broker, or they don't assume it for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I mean, if you're self-clearing, 100% of the onus is on your firm. You have to create your own solution. You got to document your policies and procedures, develop all your reports. And just basically, you need to stay on top of the rule too, because FINRA keeps coming out with FAQs and guidance and updates to the rule, because I don't think they've necessarily thought of every single permutation that could occur. So your group, whether it's your regulatory, your compliance group, someone has to stay on top of all this. For the introducing brokers, the correspondent clearing firms, for introducing brokers, they'll do most of the work as the clearing agent, and they'll kind of dictate what you have to do to satisfy them, make sure that they don't get in trouble with FINRA. As far as a total solution, you're probably still going to have to add some sort of features and functions to make sure that you have the ability to answer FINRA's questions when they come in and audit you. They're not coming in to audit the correspondent clearer. They're making sure that you are compliant.
That might be a surprise.
Yeah, they probably think, well, I'm going through a large correspondent clearer. They'll take care of it for me. And the answer is no.
For a topic like 4210, this has been pretty interesting. Given the time it has taken for the rule to come into effect, there really is no excuses for preparedness. So let's face it, if you're just thinking of it now, you're too late. But what should firms be thinking of now that the rule, May 22nd is in place? Anything they should do as a double check or just extra confirmation? Any thoughts or considerations there?
Well, as you mentioned before, the boy who cried wolf, the wolf is here at the door. So I think FINRA might be a little bit easy on people if they show that they are working on putting something in place. But if you have nothing in place, they're not going to look favorably upon you.
We've approached this topic today from the perspective of firms actively engaged in the marketplace. I really do think each firm needs to review their business activity and how it affects them, because there are exemptions or exceptions to the rule or other topics to consider. For example, there's an exemption for small cash counterparties to meet certain criteria. As Jose was elaborating on, there are a lot of capital implications. This is a big deal from a FinOp perspective, and they do have to be tied tightly into the operations process and with the trading desk. So a lot to consider there. So something to think about. Definitely feel free to reach out to us to dig deeper on any of these topics. Stephen, Jose, appreciate you guys being here. Last chance for any parting thoughts or comments on the rule that's finally here. By the way, it's the longest rule I've ever seen take into effect.
Yeah, I agree. There was one very vocal broker-dealer member who was asking for 20 never was the hopeful implementation date. I won't give him a shout out, but it's been a long time coming, and it's finally here. And if you haven't done your homework and gotten a solution in place, we would love to talk to you.
I will say that one of the comments that I've heard someone referring to this as the 7-year itch. So,
well, it was really nice of them to time it with the same month as T+1 and case becoming effective and everything else. So May's a busy month. Thank you both, and join us next time.
Thanks everyone for listening. If you'd like to learn more about our experts and how Oyster can help your firm, visit our website at oysterllc.com. If you like what you heard today, follow us on whatever platform you listen to and give us a review. Reviews make it easier for people to find us. Have a great day.